Okay, babies, in your notes, there is a section called Extra Examples after all of the other examples, and I just started renumbering them, 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. So we're going to scroll down here, and we're going to look at example 3, parent opinion. In a large school system with 20 elementary schools, the school board is considering the adoption of a new policy that would require elementary students to pass a test in order to be promoted to the next grade. The PTA wants to find out whether parents agree with this plan. Listed below are some of the ideas proposed for gathering data. For each, we are going to indicate what kind of sampling strategy is involved and what, if any, biases might result. So how am I going to answer these questions? Well, I'm going to look at my list of sampling methods. Remember, we have simple random sample, stratified, cluster, systematic, and a convenience sample. We also have multi-stage sampling. All right. Under bias, we've got voluntary response, under coverage, non-response, and response bias. So we are going to look at each of these situations and see which one's which. All right, so they put a big ad in the local newspaper asking people to log their opinions on the PTA website. Well, this is a voluntary response situation. Okay, because they're just asking for volunteers to come forward. So the sampling strategy that they're using is they're basically keeping it open to everyone. So it's not really that they are going through and randomly selecting people. So technically the only thing that's going on here, they're just asking people to participate. So it's not really that there's a sampling method involved, but there is a type of bias that can occur because it could be a voluntary response situation, because only those who feel strongly will respond. And one way or the other. Okay, part B, randomly. Okay, now we're getting into the sampling. If it's random in some form, then we know that there's sampling going on. So randomly select one of the elementary schools and contact every parent by phone. Okay, so we're going to choose one out of these 20 elementary schools, and we're going to take a census of that one elementary school. This is a cluster sample because we're randomly choosing one elementary school, and then we're going to take a census of the whole thing. And a problem that might arise with this is that one school may not represent all of the schools. Okay, so that may be a problem with bias. And again, just like on part A, we didn't really have a sampling method per se, but we could identify a bias response that might occur. On part B, it's clear that we're using a cluster sample, but it's not really clear exactly which definable type of bias we might have. We just know that one school might not represent everyone. So I guess you could possibly use the idea of undercoverage, but you can only say it's undercoverage if you know for certain that this one school is not representative of all the other schools. Okay, so undercoverage might be a good example of that type of bias. All right, so part C, we send a survey home with every single student and ask the parents to fill it out and return it the next day. Well, this is an attempted census. And I know we didn't talk about a census being a sample, but a census is a type of sampling. It's just that A census in and of itself, depending on the size of your population, is sometimes not practical. You'll notice in the United States, we do a census every, decade? That's because it's a lengthy and costly process. We don't do it every year because it's too expensive and inconvenient. So this is an attempted census for this particular school system. And what kind of bias might occur? Well, non-response. And why, Ms. Griggs, is it non-response instead of voluntary? Well, because in this particular situation, it's about expectation. We are asking the parents to fill it out with the expectation that they will. But guess what? Some of them are not going to do it. So that's going to lead us to non-response bias. All right, part D. We randomly select 20 parents from each elementary school. Send them a survey and follow up with a phone call if they do not return the survey within a week. So what we're doing here, we're looking at each elementary school and taking a random sample of 20 from each one. This is a stratified sample because I've got my strata, my different elementary schools, and I'm taking a simple random sample from each of them. So this is actually, if you want to get, real technical, it's stratified with a follow-up because they are following up with these parents. They're not just leaving it. And actually, this should be, if they're going to follow up with this should actually be a pretty good way to sample. So we should have, or it should be, unbiased and nice and representative. All right. Okay, now we're going to look at example 4 because it's the same kind of scenario here. So after this, 4 new sampling strategies were proposed. For each of these, we're going to indicate the kind of sampling and what, if any, biases may result. So now they've switched up their game a little bit. So now, for part A, we run a poll on the local TV news, asking people to dial one of 2 phone numbers to indicate whether they favor or oppose the plan. Now, again, just like on part A in the last problem, there's no real sampling going on here. I'm not randomly sampling. So the only thing I can really do here is address the idea of what kind of bias I'm going to have. And just like the other problem, this is going to be voluntary bias, or voluntary response, sorry. So that's going to be voluntary response. Only those who feel strongly are going to respond. Okay, so part B, you hold a PTA meeting at each of the 20 elementary schools and tally the opinions expressed by those who attend the meetings. Again, am I randomly sampling? No. So guess what? I've got another voluntary situation here. So I'm going to have some voluntary response bias because the people who are going to show up to the meetings are going to be the ones who feel most strongly about it. So again, not taking a random sample of any kind, but I can identify some bias in how I'm seeking my data. All right, part C, randomly select one class at each elementary school and contact each of those parents. Okay, so this is going to be a situation of a multi-stage, if I could spell that, because what this is going to look like is it's going to be a cluster within each elementary school. So you can kind of think of it as a cluster stratified, all right? So I probably should have written that up there because if you'll think about it, okay, stratified, I'm looking at each elementary school, okay? So let's say I have elementary school A, B, C, D. I know there's 20, but because in number 3, the example I just did, there were 20 elementary schools. So let's say I've got A, B, C, and D, and I randomly select one class at each. So at in elementary school A, I randomly select one class, and I contact each of those parents. So these are my strata. The elementary schools are my strata, and then my cluster is the classroom that I choose for all of the parents to respond to. All right, now for part D, go through, sorry, my throat's getting all, ugh. So go through the district's enrollment records, selecting every 40th parent. PTS volunteers will go to these homes to interview people chosen. Okay, this is going to be what we would refer to as systematic, because you're going to get a list of people, okay? So your list of people, and then you're going to actually, what would make this a systematic is you randomly begin somewhere and then take every 40th person. They did leave that, or I left that word out when I wrote the question. I probably shouldn't have done that. But actually, this would probably be fairly reasonable. Okay, so probably a good method. Because if you're beginning somewhere random, you're looking at every person, and you're choosing the 40th person. That's going to give you a nice broad spectrum there. And then you're going to go to their homes to interview people. So that should ensure that you get some good information. Anyway, sorry my throat was giving out.